Coming up next on the Health Hustle.
Yeah, I didn't sign up for a race till after like 18 months of first getting into running. My first race was it's called the Nightcrawler up in Wyoming, up in the mountains, and it's a 12-hour endurance challenge is what it's called. And so you start at 6:30 p.m. and go until 6:30 a.m.
Ugh.
and you just run as many miles as you can for 12 hours. And it's all in the dark, obviously. And I think I ran like 43 miles. So it was my first half marathon, my first marathon, first ultra, all in the same race. So that was fun. But
What convinced you to do that?
that's a good question. I had a friend who was doing it, and he kind of talked me into it. He's like, let's try and run 50 miles. And I was like, okay, let's go do it. Because I'd never done a half marathon or a marathon or anything. So I'm like, we could at least get like a half marathon done, right? And then maybe a full marathon. And then again, I ended up doing 43. So we didn't get the full 50 we were going for. But yeah, to do all that in one race was pretty cool.
Savage.
Yeah. I think that's what reading David Goggins will do to you.
Hey folks, and welcome to the Health Hustle of Austin, Texas. On this show, we uncover the big ideas from your fellow health and fitness entrepreneurs in the Austin, Texas area about how they built their business and the lessons they learned along the way. Hey y'all, Corey here, and in this episode, I had a chance to bring on my guy, Jeremy Miller. I was honestly really excited to bring him on because I've seen his content journey, and it's pretty incredible to see where he's been and where he's at now just from the power of creating content, which is something we tap into this episode. Jeremy is an athlete, a running coach, a content creator. He has competed in several marathons, ultra marathons, and has recently qualified for the Boston Marathon, which I know is actually coming up this next month. He's the founder of the Stronger, Faster, Farther training program, which has helped hundreds of athletes PR their races and achieve their fitness goals. Some of the things that we get into on this episode are what it was like growing up in Wyoming. Let's just say cows. The hidden benefit of YouTube, why we learn best by doing axis deer and other wild game. Kind of a super random tangent that we go on, but it was actually kind of fun. Living in Hawaii, which is where he actually started his running journey. Working as a content creator for BPN. And if you're unfamiliar with BPN, they are a large supplement company here in Austin, Texas, and they push out a lot of amazing content. So to work with them is actually pretty awesome. When he decided to create his own personal brand, tips on creating content, a rapid fire question round, staying consistent, and so much more. One last thing, if you're a health or fitness professional and you're having difficulties getting leads, I have a free 7-step process that walks you through how to convert your social media following into paying clients. You can find the link in the description of this episode. Without further ado, let's go. Jeremy Miller, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited. We just hashed out, I feel like, all the world's problems in the last 5 minutes before actually starting the show. And
I think so.
Let's do it again.
And we didn't record any of it.
So I want to start from the days of Wyoming. So you grew up in Wyoming.
Yep.
Probably surrounded by very interesting people. I know nothing about Wyoming other than you grew up there.
There's probably more cows than people out there. In Wyoming, it's I think it's the 7th largest state by land size and the least populated state. So there's a lot of land and not a lot of people. Brutal winters. It's cold and windy, snowy. And it's really the only industry out there is oil and gas for the most part. So if you're trying to do anything outside of that, it's really difficult. And that's what kind of ultimately encouraged me to leave was I didn't want to do anything with oil and gas. I wanted to do running or content or something outside of that. And that's kind of what, again, motivated me to get out of there.
Yeah, there's so much to be said about environment and people. I talk about that all the time. And so like your ability to get out of there, I'm sure has completely transformed your life.
In college, my girlfriend and I moved to Hawaii, and that was our first exposure outside of Wyoming. Like we traveled around and, for vacations or road trips or whatever, but actually leaving and living in a whole new environment outside of Wyoming, and that was by far the most mind-opening experience either one of us had, because Hawaii is a part of the U.S., obviously, but it feels like a totally different country, especially growing up in Wyoming. It's like the ocean and the culture and the beaches and the mountains and everything are just so different, just polar opposite from Wyoming. And as a 21-year-old, like leaving home for the first time and going and doing that was just so mind-opening. Because I feel like growing up in a small town, especially in Wyoming, it's like a very demographically homogenous state. Like you just don't get a lot of variation or diversity. So everybody thinks the same. They all go to the same restaurants. Like eating out for us was going to like Applebee's. Like it was, you just kind of just do the same old thing every day. And so again, just a very mind-opening experience getting out of there.
So before we get to why, and that will be a very fun part of this story, but I'll just kind of leave that for people for a moment. But your experience in Wyoming, like what, I honestly know nothing about Wyoming. Like what is there even to be known about there other than a lot of cows?
Oh man, I mean, I don't have a good answer because there's not a lot going on out there. To be honest, like it's a ton of farming, ranching, oil field. I mean, there's the Tetons in Yellowstone. With the show Yellowstone, everybody knows about that now. So there are some beautiful parts of Wyoming, but I feel like just as a young person, it's just not a great place to network and meet people. There's just not a lot of opportunity, and I don't know where that came from for me that I wanted to be around people and network and have different opportunities like that. But I just knew that being in that place wasn't gonna lead me down that road. And I still have so many friends that are out in Wyoming I love them. They're my friends and I've known them forever, but they're still just kind of doing the same thing that they were doing in high school and in middle school. And it's just the same kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I didn't want to do that.
What do you feel like differentiates you? Because how did you not kind of get pulled into that trap? Because I think more often than not, it would have been more comfortable to stay there, but you obviously realized that wasn't the path for you. Have you always just been like kind of the odd duck or what?
Comfortable is a good way to put it. And complacency, I guess, almost, where it's like when you get into a routine and you get into, the day-to-day rhythm of life and things are going well, you're like, I don't need to change anything. I don't need to, go move somewhere or whatever. So I honestly don't know. I don't know. I guess that would make me an odd duck, maybe.
I think it does, because I would say more often than not, you grow up in a small town, and anywhere like in that area. I grew up in Minnesota. I'm from the Midwest as well. And I can say more often than not, like it's much easier to just kind of like stay into the world you know and the world you've seen. And so for somebody to decide to leave, they're often just like, there's something about it, whether they had a unique experience, they had a different upbringing, they just see the world differently. So I'm just curious as to like, what do you think it is about you?
One thing that comes to mind is every time I played hockey growing up and baseball, so we'd travel a lot for that. We'd go down to Colorado and up to Montana and just surrounding states a lot. And every time we would travel for sports or vacation and we'd go to a new place, I would get really excited. I don't know if it was just like being in a new place or seeing something you've never seen before or trying new foods, whatever it was, that just always really excited me. Whereas I feel like a lot of my friends, they wouldn't think much of it. But I think maybe that is what, gave me that spark, I guess, to like want to go do something else. The
excitement of seeing new things. Did your parents encourage that, or they just kind of let you carve your own path?
I would say they encouraged it. Yeah, like they got us out of the house a lot to go to travel and go on vacations, and even if it was just for a weekend somewhere. So I do have to give them credit for, encouraging us to not just stay at home on the weekends and actually go out and do stuff. And I definitely have to give credit to my girlfriend too. We've been together for 7 years, and she was the really big motivating factor for us to leave and go do the exchange program in Hawaii. Because if it were up to me, I probably would still be living in Wyoming. Because if I wouldn't have had the experience moving there, I wouldn't have had all these other mind changing experiences when we moved there. So yeah, that was just a very important part of my life, I guess, was just getting out of there and being very uncomfortable in a new situation.
Yeah, and I want to get into that Hawaii aspect of it because I know that's a pretty big part of your story. So ultimately, you were in school in Wyoming, and then you had the opportunity to go to Hawaii for a year and kind of experience a new place, new culture, new environment. Can we talk about that? Like, what was that experience like for you, and what did you learn?
Yeah, it was my junior year of college. I went to the University of Wyoming. It's the only 4-year school in Wyoming. So basically everybody from high school that you already know are just going to college together as well. And we found out about this program called the National Student Exchange, and it basically allows you to go to any U.S.-based university, and you can get in-state tuition there, or you can have your whatever tuition you pay at your like home college, you can just pay that same tuition at whatever college you choose to go to. Because normally Hawaii is like super, super expensive, and Wyoming is very, very cheap. So we could go to a new school, live in Hawaii for essentially the same cost, which was cool. So we did that, and the reason for picking Hawaii specifically was so my girlfriend's sister had passed away in a car accident in 2017, and they spread her ashes in Hawaii because they would go to Hawaii every year for vacation. And so it was just like a really close place for her, like a close to the heart. And that was her main reason for wanting to go over there. And I was just like, all right, let's do it. So we basically packed up, moved to Hawaii, bought a car while we were over there, which is cool. So we could like get around the island and do whatever we wanted to do every day. Had a lot of freedom, which was nice. And I only had all my classes were online minus one each semester. So the rest of the time, like 5 days a week, I was just going to the beach, going on a hike, going to new restaurants, just really trying to immerse ourselves into that culture as much as possible and meeting people, meeting the locals. And we just really tried to be a part of the local culture as much as possible because we knew we were only going to be there for about 9 months. And so we're like, okay, we got to make the most of it. So every single day we were out doing something. And along with that was we started a YouTube channel and started posting weekly vlogs, really as just like an incentive for us to, okay, we're like every Sunday we're going to put out an episode, and that's just going to incentivize us to get out and do something for that week. So if it was Friday night and we hadn't done anything really that week, we're like, okay, we got to go on a hike tomorrow morning. We got to go to the beach, whatever it is. And that is also where I really fell in love with like editing video and the content side of things and YouTube and working with cameras and all that, and getting comfortable with being on camera because some of our first vlogs were so bad. Like they're still on my YouTube channel and they're just so bad. Like we were super awkward, didn't know how to talk on camera. And the editing was just terrible. All the everything that was bad about it was bad. I don't know. It was just not great. But because of that got us out of our comfort zone again, and really just fell in love with like the documentation of everything. And now, I mean, that's what I do for a living. So that's kind of the origins of it, I guess.
Yeah, I think I've never thought about it that way, but do you feel like being a content creator encouraged you to just live a more interesting life?
100%, because it's obviously the more interesting stuff you're doing on cameras, the more views it's going to get, or the cooler the video is going to turn out. And so that was what we figured out in Hawaii too, is like, okay, there's this like small little hike we could go do here, or we could drive an extra hour to go do this really cool hike with this big waterfall or whatever. So it's kind of just like a shift in mindset of like, do we want to go do something big for the camera? And I think not that it's always for that purpose, but because of that also then leads you into doing other things that you might not normally do, because you have the justification of like, oh, we're going to go film it and make it look cool. So again, therefore, then you end up doing stuff you probably wouldn't normally do.
Yeah, that's a really cool reframing for me, because I think oftentimes a pushback for a lot of people is that, are you just doing it for the video? Are you just doing it for the views? Right? Which I think is an appropriate pushback. But at the same time, with that framing of like, well, it actually encourages me just to like live a more exciting life, and to essentially, my friend always says, live a life worth telling a story about. You're literally doing that if you're creating YouTube videos.
Yeah. I mean, every YouTube video, every Instagram reel, no matter how short or long the video is, you're telling a story in some way. And so trying to just make it as interesting and exciting as possible. And I think, and that's where it all started too, is we just wanted to get out and do stuff and experience new things. But for us, maybe just like subconsciously, it helped knowing that other people were going to be watching. So we wanted to like make it more entertaining or make it more funny or more exciting, whatever it is. I think maybe it was just a justification for us.
What would be an example of maybe a moment when that happened for you, of like when you were going to do just like the casual thing, but you're like, oh, this would have been this will be a really great video. Like, let's go do this excursion or adventure.
I went shark diving, like no cage or anything while we were there.
Oh yeah.
So that was pretty epic. I normally probably would have never done that, or Bree probably never would have let me do that. She didn't do it. She didn't get in the water. It was just me. But I think if like I didn't, take my GoPro with me and film the whole experience, I don't honestly know if I would have done it, but I'm like, oh, this would be great for the vlog. So
this reminds me of Rob Dyrdek. Did you ever follow Robin Big?
The Fantasy Factory?
Yeah. Did you see the one where he got bit by a shark?
I did not. I probably wouldn't have gone shark diving if I would have seen that.
Well, he did it on purpose. So he wore like male like Renaissance armor, like what do they call that?
Okay.
Chainmail. He wore chainmail, and he knew like the shark couldn't bite through chainmail, but he literally got a shark to bite his arm.
Gosh.
And obviously he just did it because it was entertaining, and it was so cool. But
I haven't done anything that crazy that I could think of. I mean, I went skydiving while we were there. That was probably a similar thing. I mean, I always wanted to go skydiving, but again, having that idea of like, oh, this will be really good for the vlog this week. It's kind of just like a push also, like instead of, oh, I want to go skydiving, but I'm like, oh, knowing you got to put out a vlog that week or make some content, I think it's just a justification and a reasoning to go and do some of that stuff that I think a lot of people want to do, but maybe, I don't know, they don't have that that justification for it.
Yeah. Honestly, I like that framing a lot. That's cool because like it's something I've been thinking a lot of. Well, is like you said the word story. I often use the word experiment. Is that I look at it as just like running experiments. And so like whatever it is, whether it's like shark diving or skydiving or whatever it is, like those are just fun experiments to run in life.
Experiments as far as like testing to see if you like it and you enjoy it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Or if it even works, right? Like taking like a content or a business aspect or a marketing aspect of just running experiments and seeing what happens. Because otherwise, you have no idea otherwise. I was literally writing about this the other day, is that everyone has this perception of good content, good marketing, bad marketing. And the only bad marketing is not marketing. And marketing at the end of the day today is just creating content. And so it's like, just try a bunch of fun stuff that sounds cool to you and see what happens.
Yeah, that's the first thing I tell people when they ask me, like, they tell me they want to get into content, they want to start making videos and building their personal brand or whatever, but they don't know what their niche is, or they don't know, what industry they should dive into or what kind of content they should create. And I tell them that same thing. I'm like, you just literally try everything. Anything that you have any sort of interest in, even if you don't think you're interested in it, like just try it. See if it works for you, if you enjoy making content around that, see if people that are watching it enjoy seeing you do it. I think just trying everything is so important. And again, I think through that process, you really find out what values you have and what's important to you, not just within content, but just in life in general. Yeah, I think, I don't know, that's kind of a philosophy that I've really come to learn over the last few years, is just try everything. Like I used to be a super picky eater. Like I wouldn't eat fish or vegetables or any of this stuff. And then one day I'm just like, all right, let's just try it, see if we like it now. I love stuff like that. So it's an odd example, I guess, but just trying to do as much as possible and try everything.
It's the exact reason that this podcast show, I actually chose to do it in person. Everyone and their mom is pushing towards this like digital realm and doing everything online, and that's all fine. Everyone wants to be autonomous and remote and live in Thailand or whatever it is. That's all cool. But I've also found too that it's actually way more enjoyable for me to sit down like we are right now with headphones and a microphone and being in person with somebody. It's just more fun for me. And I figured that out by trying stuff, right? I did a lot of online ones and it just wasn't fun. And so I just decided to stop doing it.
Yeah, the quickest way to know what you like or don't like is to do a bunch of shit, right? Like just do everything. And I think more so is you probably find out more what you don't like by doing stuff like that. Yeah, like I just started my own podcast a couple weeks ago, and I've only done 2 episodes so far, but I've been on podcasts where it's Zoom and it's not the same. Like there's the delay and it seems more interviewee and not as conversational like this, and it just doesn't feel as natural. And there's just definitely something to be said about being in person and having like that human to human contact too.
I know the thing that I knew I didn't like right away. It's called black licorice. It's the only food I don't like.
That's fair enough. That's the only food you can think of you don't like?
That's the only one.
Really? Yeah. Everything else is fair game?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oysters.
Like there's a lot of worse stuff out there.
Squid, whatever. It's all good. I guess I've never had, I was feeding my friend's dog the other day, Ross and Savannah. You know Ross, right? Ross
Yeah.
I was taking care of their dogs a couple weeks ago, and one of their dogs eats chicken feet. So I've never had chicken feet, but I imagine those aren't good, but I have no idea.
Could be better than black licorice, though. I don't know.
I guess if you deep fry it, maybe, right?
What's like the craziest food you've tried?
That I've tried. I think the one that comes to mind was actually, it's not that crazy, but when I was in Mexico, just the octopus, it was like raw octopus. I was shocked actually how good it was. I went into it obviously thinking no.
Yeah.
That's probably the craziest thing. The one I want to try though, to answer your question fully, that I haven't yet is actually donkey.
Donkey. I didn't know people ate donkey.
Yeah, it's really big in like obviously China or Japan or whatever. Right. And I've heard it's actually really good.
Interesting.
Shockingly. So
I don't even know what that would taste like.
Yeah. I had Axis recently, the deer.
Oh yeah.
That's amazing.
That's on one of the Hawaiian islands. I think it's Niihau is where there's like more axis deer. There's like 10-1 axis deer to people on that island. It's nuts.
And I don't remember what the word is, but they're invasive. They're an invasive species.
I think they come from India, right?
Yes. And so I was talking to a guy the other day here in Austin. He was telling me, he said, yeah, you can basically shoot as many as you want. I was like, why am I buying meat? You know what I mean? Like if I could go out and just kill a bunch of Axis, which is very healthy, very good, tastes amazing. I was like, why am I buying meat? Like if I can just shoot unlimited these things.
Where did you get it here in Austin?
A buddy of mine, Seth gave it to me. He does a bunch of hunting. And so he gave me some. It was the first time I ever had it. And because I grew up in Minnesota with whitetail and it's delicious, but it's like, yeah, there's a season. You have to freeze your ass off in 30 below weather. You can only have so many tags. Wow. Oftentimes you don't get one. But if I could just go like down the street here in Texas and shoot one, it's like, why would I not do that?
Are there axis deer in Texas?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Damn. Have you heard of them in Hawaii?
No, I didn't know that. It sounds like they're invasive in a lot of places, though.
Interesting.
They're beautiful deer.
There's a story. I don't know the story exactly, but some like king or prince or something brought him over to Hawaii from India like a couple hundred years ago, and now there's just a shit ton of them over there.
Same here. I don't know who brought them here.
It's so wild. And I think I've heard people talk about them that they go over there to hunt them. They say that I think it's called string jumping, where they're so fast and elusive that I think you have to shoot them with a bow in Hawaii, or maybe it might be a rifle. I don't know. But by the time you release the string of the bow, like they've already moved because they're so fast and they're like ninjas.
Damn.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
They're beautiful. They kind of look like Bambi because they have like the little spots on them, but they have those like year round versus like most whitetail. It's only when they're babies that they have that. But
how did it taste?
Very clean, because like I think a lot of wild game has like a gamey flavor. It doesn't at all. It's just, you honestly, like you could put it next to a steak, and the only way you would know a difference, when I say steak I mean cow, but the only way you would know a difference is it's very lean, right? There's like almost no fat on it, which is fine. But
do you like elk?
I do. Actually, Seth gave me some of that as well. My buddy, I hooked him with a whole bunch of stuff. The only animal
I gotta meet this guy.
I know, right? The only one that I haven't had, but which has been it's shocking to me, is actually bear. Have you ever had bear?
I have not.
That's supposedly pretty greasy, but I know
I've heard that.
I know it's pretty good overall. But anyways, totally digress. Massive tangent. Let's get back to Hawaii. Something I'm curious about Hawaii in terms of someone that was there creating content, doing vlogs. What was your experience with like the locals in town? Like, did you have a good experience, a bad experience? Was there any pushback? Was it weird when you were around just like filming yourself on a video?
I mean, I think for you, that's always weird. Or for the person doing it, it's always a little weird. But I think nowadays, even then, because this was in 2018, 2019, I think even then, like people are pretty accustomed to people just walking around with cameras, filming, especially in a place like Hawaii. Like there's so many tourists. And it's a super beautiful place, obviously, so everybody's got cameras out taking pictures. But I guess overall, with the locals, it was good. I didn't have any, like, notable experiences, I guess, where it was negative. There is, like, my undergrad was political science, and so this was, like, right after the 2016 election, or in between 2016 2020 election, and so, like, there's just a lot of, like, political shit going on then. And so being there, like, you get, like, a very unique perspective, just because it definitely is more left-leaning over there. And from Wyoming, like everybody I'm used to is right-leaning. And so that was just a whole other part of being thrown into this different culture, was like hearing all these new different perspectives that I wasn't used to hearing in Wyoming. But with that being said, like it was nothing ever negative necessarily. I do feel like, I don't know, there's a tough thing with Hawaii because, I don't know, it's controversial, I suppose, I don't know. But like, America essentially stole it at some point, like within the last couple hundred years. I don't know the exact history, but I do know that it was basically stolen. And so I think there is maybe some like negative feelings towards Americans in general from the locals, but I personally never felt that. But I hear that from a lot of people that move there and like stay there for a while, that it's kind of hard to get into circles and stuff like that. And maybe if you're older, or I can't say I personally experienced anything negative, but I have heard that it can be sometimes.
Do you know any of the Hawaii jargon? I think somebody was telling me the other day it's called grind.
Yeah, like I think that's good food.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know any other? He was telling me a whole bunch of them. I think another one was like tick, if you're super buff or jacked or something like that. Like that guy's tick.
I think I've heard that. Man, it's been a few years since we were over there. But haole means like white person from the mainland. So I heard haole a lot.
Haole, okay.
Haole. Yeah, it's like it's not rude necessarily, but I don't know. I'm trying to think what else. How's it? Everybody would say how's it, meaning like how's it going? But it's just how's it. We said that a lot. Aloha, obviously everybody says aloha, and aloha can mean a ton of different things. But it's such a cool, unique culture. Yeah. And again, as like a 21-year-old, I feel like if I were to go back now, I would probably approach it a little bit differently, of just like really trying to, we did get into the culture and immerse ourselves and stuff, but like I've always just been more introverted, and I feel like if we were to go back now, it would be a different experience of like going to like local running groups, or going to like more local, group settings, I guess, of any kind. But like I met a lot of people through school and in classes and on campus and stuff like that. So
I feel like the latest American jargon that this is going to make me sound like this is probably going to be the lamest thing I've ever said on a podcast show. But the one recently is bet. Are you familiar with this expression?
kind of. I'm.
So it's basically just like an agreement of like,
Oh, okay. I've heard that. Okay.
like, hey, let's meet at South by Southwest this weekend, and they'll say bet.
I've heard this. I've never used it.
I hadn't either. The other one recently was like slap, like that slaps. That one makes more sense to me.
Okay.
But
Yeah, dude, it's like TikTok language to me. I don't understand a lot of it. I'm not good with any of that.
So is Hawaii also where you picked up running? Because like before we get to just so people know where we're going with this journey is like that's essentially what you do now today, right? You're a running coach and you basically teach people how to be better running, right?
Yeah.
So is that where the beginning of running started for you? Was when you were in Hawaii?
Yes. So I played sports growing up. Always absolutely hated running because it was normally used as punishment. So I always resented it. And it was this was 2018. I was just sitting on the bus riding to school, and I was listening to Joe Rogan podcast with David Goggins, and never heard of David Goggins before. Didn't know that anybody ran 100-mile races. Didn't even know that existed at the time. And I heard him tell a story about his first 100 and just his whole insane story that I'm sure you've heard of. And I bought his book because he was on there promoting his first book, read his book, and just wanted to try running for more so like the mental benefits. Because I've always like strength trained and lifted and stuff like that. But again, I always hated running. And so after hearing his book and his story and really like his whole why behind running is just to strengthen his mind more or less. And I thought that was very interesting. And I mean, because once you have a strong mindset, you can do basically anything you want. And so it seemed like running was just a really good tool to do that with. And so I started just like 1 mile a day, 2 miles a day, slowly working up. And really for the first year, I didn't do anything more than like 4 miles all in one shot. So it was just like really trying to figure out the process of running. And then after about a year and a half of kind of just doing 1 to 2 miles a day, 4 miles maybe, I went for like my first 10-mile run. And that was like a big accomplishment because I was like, that just always seems so daunting to go and run 10 miles at one time.
Just on your own in Hawaii, like no event or anything like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't sign up for a race till after like 18 months of first getting into running. And my first race was it's called the Nightcrawler up in Wyoming, up in the mountains, and it's a 12-hour endurance challenge is what it's called. And so you start at 6:30 p.m. and go until 6:30 a.m.
Ugh.
And you just run as many miles as you can for 12 hours. And it's all in the dark, obviously. And I think I ran like 43 miles. So it was my first half marathon, my first marathon, first ultra, all in the same race. So that was fun. But
What convinced you to do that?
that's a good question. I had a friend who was doing it, and he kind of talked me into it. He's like, let's try and run 50 miles. And I was like, okay, let's go do it. Because I'd never done a half marathon or a marathon or anything. So I'm like, we could at least get like a half marathon done, right? And then maybe a full marathon. And then again, I ended up doing 43. So we didn't get the full 50 we were going for. But yeah, to do all that in one race was pretty cool.
Savage.
Yeah. I think that's what reading David Goggins will do to you.
Do you know the name? I might mess it up. Ken Rideout?
Yeah. I met him, yeah.
Okay, I just recently discovered him, and
He's a badass.
I've fallen in love.
His thing is like he keeps getting faster as he's getting older.
Yes.
And he's like in his 50s maybe?
Yes.
Yeah. He's a stud.
It's his mentality though that appeals to me. Like,
Right.
yeah, he's a great athlete and he's doing incredible things, but it's his mentality. He like when I listen to him now, and I'm sure people listening to this have probably never heard of him. I think a lot of people have probably never really heard of him, but when I listen to him talk about, first of all, where he came from and what he's doing now in terms of just like the athletic adventures, his mentality to me is just, it's incredible. I mean, obviously it probably goes very close in line with like a lot of David Goggins stuff, but yeah, it's just funny. The one that honestly sticks out to me the most is, and I might butcher it, but he said, what did he say? It's harder to quit than it is to suffer. And I've been thinking a lot about that of like, and he tells a story of how he did an Ironman and he quit partway through it. He was completely exhausted. He was like, I felt like all the lights in the car were going off, like the warning signs and everything. And he's like, I was just completely exhausted and I quit. And then he said he spent the next year regretting quitting because he didn't really feel like he gave it everything he had. And I was like, fuck, like that's so good. Like I just love that mentality.
That's definitely something I've never thought of it in that regard. What was this quote again? It's
harder to quit than it is to suffer.
yeah, I've never actually put it into like a concise statement like that, but like I just ran a race a couple weeks ago, and it's like when you get into that race mindset, and okay, you're like, okay, I got 2 miles left, and it feels like for fucking ever because you're just dogging it, like you're pushing as hard as you can. You're like, I don't know if I can keep going for 2 more miles, but then you ask yourself, okay, do I keep pushing for the next 2 miles, which is going to take 10, 15 minutes, or are you going to have to live with the regret of quitting if you stop now for months and months and months? And that, so I ran my first full marathon last year, and I wanted to go for sub 3 to qualify for Boston, and I ran 3 hours and 54 seconds. So literally it was like 2 seconds a mile that I missed it by. And
did you know, like coming into the finish line, that you were that close?
Kind of. It was like mile 24. I knew I wasn't going to make it. So I just pushed through with whatever I had left. I bonked hard because I didn't know anything about nutrition or hydration or any of that kind of stuff. But that's where I learned that lesson of like, I feel like I could have probably pushed through, and 54 seconds is like not a long time over the course of 3 hours. And so for the next like 3 to 4 months after that, I just had to live with that regret basically of, man, I knew I could have pushed harder if I had to, if it was another like 10 to 15 minutes of just pushing it. But instead now I have to think about it for the next 4 months.
Do you have any idea what motivates you? Like you're obviously an ambitious guy. You're obviously fit. You like to work out. You like to chase goals and do exciting things with your life. But do you know why? Like, do you know what's at the core of that?
I think just the idea of trying to be the best version of myself, which sounds so cheesy and cliche, but I just know that I love running. I love physical challenges, and I love documenting my journey and sharing that with other people, and then ultimately inspiring them to do the same. And so I think that's what I guess at the core of it would motivate me, is just trying to be the best that I can be, so then I can share that journey and then ultimately help other people do the same.
Do you find that you get a lot of feedback from people from just the content that you create and the journey that you share?
Yeah, it's generally like really, really good feedback for that reason of like, hey, you inspired me to go run my first half marathon, or I signed up for my first marathon this fall, or I just PR'd my race this last weekend because I was following your content, that kind of stuff. And that's like a huge driving factor to keep me doing it. And it's like when I was running a race a few weeks ago, I was like, in my head, it's not like, oh, I got to finish this race and do this time that I want to do because I told myself I was going to do it. It's more so because I told other people I was going to do it. And I feel like an accountability to them, because I'm not that they would even care if I quit the race or if I didn't hit the time I said I was going to hit or whatever, but because I just feel like it's almost letting them down, even though they probably wouldn't care really. But that's just, I don't know, the way that I justify it to myself, I guess.
Yeah, it holds you to a higher standard. So have you found any, or do you have any stories of when content showed up in a way that you didn't expect it to? Like, have you ever had people that have just like reached out to you that you didn't expect, or things that they said, or some impact that's had on somebody's life that you maybe didn't expect?
I think just like getting those same messages of like, I signed up for my first race, or I think some of my favorite ones are those people who maybe they like ran a race 20 or 30 years ago and they're like in their 50s or 60s, where most people would consider that out of their prime or like past their athletic, peak or whatever. And they're like, my kid just moved out of the house and I wanted to find something else to do with my time, so I started picking up running again. Or it's like, hey, I lost a couple 100 pounds and I wanted to get back into running, or whatever it might be. And so just hearing everybody's stories, and everybody has a story, which is the coolest part, but hearing their story and how I've played a role in that, that's like, it's just super inspiring.
I want to get back to your story as to like how eventually you left Hawaii, but before I do, I want to pull on this thread one more time of the content creation aspect of it, because I think it's really important for people, and I know you're very, very good at it. And as someone that's obviously been doing this now for, what does that make it, 4 years, 5 years now or something?
Yep.
What maybe could you help other people learn as to, what do you think about when you're creating content, or like what are your intentions? Because I've seen a lot of your stuff and you've grown a lot for sure within the last like year here. Like, what do you think changed, or what are you doing differently, or what's been the key?
There's been a few things. And talking about growth, I think my Instagram was at like 4,000 followers in July of last year, and now like 7-8 months later it's at like 80,000, which is just insane to me. But I think what I started implementing was more, there's a few different things, but as a whole, just being more intentional with it. Of like, before I would just post like I don't know, some random photo or whatever that didn't really have a lot of value to people. And just being more intentional with what value I was providing and trying to be as relatable as possible too. I think that's a huge thing for growing content and or growing your page, whatever it is just being relatable to people. Because for me, like I knew I wasn't gonna grow my page by like winning a bunch of races or going and doing some insane physical challenge, but I can do it by showing people that, hey, I'm just like a pretty average guy who's not running, elite qualifying times, whatever it is, but I'm just like more or less average, and just showing my journey and documenting my journey to people. So I would say, one, focusing on just the value that I'm providing, trying to provide as much value as possible. And that's something that I ask myself before I post any content ever, is like, what value is this providing, if any, and how can I frame it or add to it to make it more valuable? And that can mean a number of things. It could be informative, educational, funny, entertaining, whatever it is. And then second, just being relatable. And I think the only way to be relatable also is to just be authentic too. Like you have to be genuine and be original and just be yourself, because otherwise people are going to pick up on like, oh, this guy's he's not legit. He's not being authentic. And so you just have to just be yourself and be vulnerable and put yourself out there. So it was a number of things, but again, as a whole, I think just providing as much value and being intentional with it.
And has the realm always been around the running stuff? Has that been a component of it as well, or is it pretty diverse?
Yeah, I guess within the last like 7 or 8 months, it's definitely been more running focused, which I think definitely helped grow my page, because now people know, okay, if I follow this guy, I'm going to learn something about running, which can sometimes pigeonhole me, because I feel like if I almost sometimes have to post running content, but that's something I'm really working on, is like trying to sprinkle in things, 20 to 30% of the time that aren't running. It's like me with my dogs or with my girlfriend, or I don't know, some other adventure that I'm on. But I think the thing sticking to just being authentic and genuine is like, that's a cool part about content, is like, as long as I'm documenting my life and what I'm doing, then it's gonna slowly evolve over time. And I think that's what makes it sustainable too, is I'm not like manufacturing or constantly having to create content. I'm just documenting my journey and showing people what I'm doing.
Totally. I learned that from Matt Choi and Gary Vee.
Yeah.
And I just wrote that the other day about document, don't create. Okay. Yeah. So you eventually left Hawaii to go to the Carolinas. Mm-hmm. Why?
That's a good question. So we left Hawaii, went back to Wyoming for a year just to finish up school. And then it was like just a few months after we finished up school, we're like, okay, we got to leave Wyoming, because we knew we didn't really want to be there. We just knew there was more opportunity, and we just learned the value of getting out and being uncomfortable. So we picked the Carolinas. I don't really know why, to be honest. It just seemed like a cool place. Like it looked beautiful. We moved to Asheville, North Carolina, like being in the mountains. At the time I was like really, really into trail running, and it's like the mecca of trail running, at least for the East Coast. And we've never really been to the East at all, back East. And I don't know, the weather seemed nice. People seemed cool. So we just picked it, packed up and moved, lived there for about a year. And then that's the benefit of not having kids or anything. So it can be a little bit more nomadic, but lived there for about a year, and then basically did the same thing, moved south like 2 hours down to Greenville, South Carolina. Same thing, just beautiful place. Like the downtown is super nice. It's like 1 million people in that area, I think. So like lots of opportunity still. And we actually planned on being there for a while, but I got an opportunity to come here to Austin to work for BPN and Nick Bear, and took that up.
How did you get that opportunity?
I was filming a documentary on a friend in 2021. He was doing it's called the Grand Slam of ultra running, and it's the 4 oldest 100-mile races in the U.S., and they're all within 13 weeks, a 13-week span. And so it was just a passion project, basically. I texted him. I was like, at the time I wanted to just film one of his races, because I knew he ran 100-miler. So I asked him if he was going to be running any 100-mile races this summer. And he's like, hey, I'm actually doing the Grand Slam, which is 4 of them. And I'm like, shit, let's just film all 4 of them. So I'd, paid for my flights and food and hotel and everything to just fly around the country and document these 4 races, and then put it into a documentary, which is on YouTube now. But at one of the races was Leadville, and Nick was running Leadville, and the whole BPN team was there. And I was a fan of their content and what they do prior to that, and ran into them in Leadville and just basically shook their hand and like made sure they knew who I was. But I wasn't like the weirdo asking for a job, like, oh, I'll come sweep the floors, whatever, because there's a lot of that. But just made sure they knew who I was. And then like 3 months later, they texted me and they're like, hey, Nick's hiring for a videographer position. Do you want to come down to Austin and work for us and do content for him? And I was like, yeah, let's do it.
So they basically just like handed you the job.
For the most part, yeah. I mean, I had to interview and like they had to make sure I wasn't, a weirdo or something. I
Was
guess.
that based on the documentary that you did for that other guy?
I hadn't even put it out at that time, but I think because it took me like 6 months to edit that, and that they hit me up just a few months after I met him. But I think that I had a lot of content out on YouTube, and they were just able to see some of my work through that. Yeah, I don't know. It was, I think, just the networking aspect of like, I had to work up the courage to go and talk to him and shake his hand and talk to the team and stuff. Because I'm really more of an introverted person and hate doing stuff like that. But I knew I'm like, okay, this is like probably the only time I'll ever have this opportunity to talk to somebody like this. And it's always weird, seeing people on the internet and then meeting them in person, and so, especially with somebody well known like that.
It's weird both ways though too, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you've experienced this as well.
Yeah.
Is like when somebody follows you and they come up and talk to you.
Yeah.
I now have a lot of empathy for both sides,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is like being the person that's like reaching out and like wanting to talk to somebody that I'm interested, and then vice versa when people are like, hey, like I follow your stuff. It's like, it feels good though, right? Is like there is an aspect of, just to give people context who like have that fear of like talking to someone, more often than not, they appreciate it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I think there's probably a threshold, right? Where like if you turn to somebody like Rogan and you can't go to Walmart or whatever without people attacking you. But I think at least for me over the last few months, like when I go to any kind of running event or something, almost always there's somebody that's like, hey, I follow you on Instagram. And I look forward to that almost because it's cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. And I like to give people that context because like I think a lot of people are fearful because they're like, they feel like, oh, they don't know me or I'm going to be interrupting them. And it's like, no, actually, they probably appreciate that you actually like follow what the hell they're doing. So
yeah, now kind of being in that opposite position, I realized like how, for me at least, how dumb it was to be so nervous to go up and talk to somebody like that. Because I'm like, oh, we're all just people. We're all just humans. Like, it's just you happen to pick something that's going to make you famous or well known, I guess.
So you started working for BPN. You did that for approximately a year, right?
Yeah, it was about 8 months, give or take.
Okay.
Yeah, until August of last year.
And that's when you decided to eventually start doing your own thing, right?
Yeah, it kind of just came to the point where I was doing Nick's YouTube, his TikTok, his Instagram, like most of his personal content, just a lot of time and energy and personal investment, and got to the point where I was like, man, I think I could do this for myself. And because I've always wanted to build something for myself. I've always been more entrepreneurial and wanted to have a personal brand and, build something for myself. And so I feel like I just got to the point where I learned enough and I had enough knowledge where I could just go out and do it on my own. So like July or so, I started posting more personal content, started building some stuff up in the back end and, doing more YouTube videos, all that kind of stuff. And then started coaching people for running around the same time because I was putting out more running content. I had more people asking me, hey, I know you know a lot about running or whatever, like, can you help me run my first marathon? And then that developed into the coaching business. And now I think since just like July 20th, I've posted every single day on Instagram of some sort and just stayed really, really consistent with it. And at the time, I didn't really have like an end goal of like, okay, I'm going to post every day for the next year. It was just, okay, I'm going to post every day this week. And then I did it for a week and I was like, oh, that wasn't that bad. Let's try it again this week. And then now I've just made it a part of my day-to-day routine. Every single day I post content or create content of some kind and upload it. And I think that's definitely a big part of the growth too, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, is just the consistency aspect is so huge to try and grow your page, because it's just like with anything with marketing, you have to constantly be in people's minds. And if somebody thinks of a running coach, you want to be the first person that they think of, or whatever your business is.
Totally. And for anybody else that's still in that place of kind of looking to start doing maybe a content creation or doing a personal brand or coaching or whatever it is that they're into, of the lag time of something like that, is because you're right, is that it's not so much of creating content to sell in any way, shape, or form. It's just creating content so that you're just top of mind, right? And people start to notice you. Because like it took even me personally, I don't know if you had a similar experience, but it just took a long enough consistent timeline of just showing up in front of people before you suddenly like were remembered for that thing in their mind, and now they just kind of reach out because they're like, oh, you do this thing, right? Because I've seen all your stuff. But there's a lag time there.
Yeah, definitely. I think I don't know what that time is exactly. I think it's different for every situation. But I mean, for you, for example, it's like you want to be the first person somebody thinks of when they think of a health and wellness podcast or your business or whatever it is. So yeah, it just takes time. And I think content as a whole is just being consistent and providing value, and consistently providing value. That's what's going to get people to notice you and remember you, and again, be on top of mind.
This is sometimes a tough question for people, but I'd be curious as to, now that you're doing your own thing, you're doing the coaching thing, is What's maybe the most expensive mistake you've made, and that could be emotionally or monetarily?
I'm an overthinker for sure. So when it comes to like expenses, I'm usually pretty good about that stuff. Emotionally, mistake. That's a good question.
Maybe you don't have one.
I mean, nothing comes to mind immediately because I try to avoid mistakes as much as possible. But man, I don't know. Come back to me on that one.
Okay. So I know you're a big believer in having a personal brand. And in regards to like building your own personal brand or anybody else that wants to build a personal brand, like what have you, other than content? I mean, I feel like there's probably something most people know. Like what are maybe the important parts of something that somebody should be focused on, something they should be thinking about, or what are the aspects of like really building a personal brand?
Before I answer that one, I thought of something for your other one.
Yeah.
A mistake would be just worrying about the numbers of views that you're getting and the comments and just the overall like engagement. Like if you're not getting, I think that can be one of the hardest parts for people starting out trying to create a personal brand or creating content is when you have 100 people watching your video and then you go to somebody else's page and they have 100,000, like that can be really discouraging. And I think it's just the saying of, comparison is the thief of joy, or I think it's Jordan Peterson that says compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who somebody else is today. And having that mindset is so huge because that's what's going to develop the longevity of it and get you through those really hard moments when people aren't watching or engaging with your content. So I definitely made that mistake, and it for probably 4 or 5 years, honestly, where like I was like, oh, this YouTube video got 50 views. Like, what's the point of even making all this stuff? Like, investing all this time and energy into it when nobody's going to watch it. But I think that's part of the process. And I don't know, this is maybe just my way of justifying it, but I think that maybe like the algorithms or whatever, like that's their way of weeding out the true people who want to actually create content and are invested in it and willing to do it, as opposed to people who are just like kind of trying it out, testing the waters. And I've again, this is just my weird like conspiracy theory I think about like Instagram. When I first started posting every day, I never had any videos do over like 5,000-10,000 views for the first few months, and then out of nowhere they just all started taking off, and I'm like, I think it's the algorithm that's like it's wants to like test me out a little bit, make sure that I'm like committed to doing the content, whatever. And I don't know if there's any truth to that at all, but it's just my way of like justifying it, I guess.
I think there's a lot of truth to it, and the name that comes to mind is Seth Godin. If you're familiar with him, he's one of the greatest marketers of all time. I'm a huge fan. I follow all of his stuff and read all of his books, but he wrote a great book called The Dip. And it's sort of what you expect is that in the beginning of anything, whether it's content creation, a business, a relationship, a health journey, is that there's a peak in the beginning where you're excited, and then there's a massive dip where it goes low and long, and it's the valley of suck, and nothing's working, and it's hard, and it's challenging, but eventually the dip comes back up, and it rises to essentially where you want to be. But that's everything in life.
That's like I saw a stat the other day that I don't remember the exact numbers, but the vast majority of podcasts never make it past the 10th episode. Mm-hmm. And I think it's for that reason where people get really excited. I'm starting a podcast. They do 10 episodes, whatever. And then they figure out, oh man, this is going to be really hard. I got to invest a lot of time and energy into this. And then they die out. And a lot of businesses are that way, and people's personal pages, or really anything like you just mentioned.
Yeah, I was talking to my buddy Danny Miranda the other day. He has a very, very well-known podcast. If anyone's ever heard of it, check him out. He's a buddy of mine here in town. But he was telling me the other day, I might mess up these statistics, but there's millions and millions of podcast shows, quote unquote, out there, but there's actually only a couple 100,000 of them that are even active. Almost all podcast shows go with they experience what's called, it's in the industry, as lame as that sounds, it's called pod fade. Is that most shows don't ever make it to episode 10. Most shows.
That's wild. I think it's that's some of my favorite. Those are my favorite stories about businesses where they're like, we were grinding for like 5-10 years and nobody's buying anything. Like we almost lost the business, almost lost all this money, or went bankrupt, whatever it is. But I think almost everybody has to go through that because it just weeds out the fake people, I guess, with people that aren't truly committed. And if you can stick it out through that, that's what's gonna separate you.
Have you read Shoe Dog?
It's on my list. I have not read it though.
It's great, man, but it's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. The amount of times Nike should have gone bankrupt is hilarious.
Really?
Yeah. It's baffling. You'll love it. It's a great book.
Some of the biggest businesses, like that's how they started, was just that like perpetual grind for years and years, and nobody knew who they were. Or like, I feel like I hear that all the time with music artists, or I think it's like J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author. Like she was denied from publications or publishers like hundreds of times, and now it's like, I think it's like the best-selling book out there.
Pretty sure it is.
It's I don't know. I think that part of the journey is so essential, and I think that's probably where you learn the most too.
The joys in the journey, my friend. I got a round of rapid fire questions for you. So it's just whatever the first thing is that comes to mind.
I'm so bad at these.
Dude, you're going to crush it. Just flip that mindset, bro.
Okay, I'm so good at
these. What's your best business advice?
I think what we just talked about is just keep going. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. Just keep going.
Favorite part about entrepreneurship?
Freedom in all aspects.
When are you the most productive?
Morning.
Who is your inspiration?
I gotta say David Goggins.
What's your best marketing advice?
Be vulnerable.
Tell me one secret about you, or something most people don't know.
I have a really, really hairy toes. I thought that hairy toes was normal, and then it was after I ran a 50-mile race last summer, and my toenails were all falling off, and I posted a picture of me ripping one off with a pair of pliers.
Yeah.
And nobody even talked about my toenails falling off. They were just talking about how hairy my toes were. I'm like, is this not normal? And so now my girlfriend will shave them like once a month for me.
Caveman. What would you change about yourself, if anything?
I'm very self-critical, so I get to name a bunch of things. I would say, like, I wish I was just, Matt Choi, right?
Yeah.
I wish I had I feel like I have his energy in regard to like productivity and like getting things done, but I wish I had his energy around people, like going into a group of people or like a space and just like being the most hype one there. I wish I had that.
Yeah, you also got to give yourself some grace though too, because like he was like what, a D1 or D2 athlete and like quarterback, like leading all, you know what I mean? Like that was just his nature of where he came from.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like guys like you and I, is like I would prefer to sit down with a book and not talk to anybody.
Yeah.
So
that's very true. There's pros and cons.
What's your favorite app or resource right now?
I feel like everybody's gonna say it, but ChatGPT. I use it actually for a lot of my content, which is really nice. Like writing voiceover scripts. I just had a contract for like a brand partnership for a podcast sponsorship. Just had it write a contract for that.
For the one you just started?
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah. I don't even know the extent to which you can use ChatGPT, but you can use it for a lot of shit.
When were you the happiest?
I think anytime I'm traveling is probably my favorite thing in the world to do. Just experiencing a new place or a new location.
Have you been to Boston?
Once. It was for like a weekend trip, so not really.
That's probably your next trip, right? Boston Marathon.
Yep. There. Going back to Hawaii later this year.
Cool.
And then Chicago later. So mostly just within the U.S. this year.
Get some deep dish for me, man. What's your favorite part about Austin? And you can't say the people.
The people are so great.
I
would say the running community here is pretty incredible. Not that I've lived in like a bunch of places where there are running communities, but out of everywhere that I have lived, this is by far the best running community. Like there's just so many people always out running, doing something, all the different running groups. Like, I mean, there's just hundreds of people in individual groups that are all happening simultaneously. Like it's cool. And just the running community in general is amazing everywhere, but it's really cool here too.
I've only recently tapped into the running community, and I can echo that statement because I actually signed up for the BPN one to go one more here at the same time as the Boston.
That's a tough course.
Thanks. Can't wait.
It'll be fun. Is that your first marathon?
Yeah, I'm not a runner. Like I have a very similar story to you. Just like your journey happened years ago, mine just started in terms of running. Cool. So it's been a whole experience. But I was going to say, in terms of the running community here, yeah, it's baffling how many groups that meet up literally daily.
Yeah.
There you can find a group to run with of people here. It's crazy.
And they're all super welcoming, encouraging, which I guess that would be the people, obviously.
For sure, but still, that community of runners.
Yeah.
I have one last question. Before I ask that question, though, I just want to acknowledge you, man, for making the choice to break out of Wyoming, to follow your curiosities, to pick up something mentally challenging like running, to growing an awesome content media platform on Instagram with so many followers, to helping other people on their running journeys, and for showing up today for this podcast interview. So
thanks, man. I appreciate it. I feel like podcasts are always like therapy. Like I always leave just questioning everything. Like, what am I doing? Am I doing it right? I don't know. Like, and you had really great questions too. Like, out of all the podcasts I've been on, like this, like the questions are always so unique. And I know you definitely do your research and take the time to learn about each guest, and I don't know, I could definitely feel that, which is cool.
I'm glad you do, because you're right. There's a lot of intention behind it. So I have one last question before I ask it, though. What's your plug? Where can people find you?
Instagram is probably the number one spot. Just Jeremy Miller. Website jeremymiller.io. YouTube Jeremy Miller. TikTok I think it's Jeremy Miller Fit. And then podcasts will be coming out April 3rd. It's just the Jeremy Miller podcast. So any of those platforms.
I'll be excited to hear that podcast, man.
I'm excited.
Last question for you. So it's really whatever your best piece of advice is. And so like, let's say you were to go back to ground zero of starting this coaching business, this running coaching business, or you were talking to anybody else that maybe wanted to start their own health, fitness, coaching business of any form. What's maybe the best piece of advice you could give to them so that they're just focused on the right thing and making the right choices?
Not to be like cheesy or cliche, I guess, but I could say a number of things here, but whatever it is you decide to do and land on, just stick with it. Just be consistent with it, and consistent not in the aspect of show up and do everything every day, but like just a little bit of something is better than a whole bunch of nothing. And so just showing up, chipping away at it one day at a time, and just staying patient and trusting the whole process of it all. And just like we talked about, with podcasts and trying to start that endeavor, getting through those like grind days, I guess you could call it, is going to be the hardest part. So if you can get through that, then I think you're good.
Yeah. I think it's often expressed of like imperfect action is better than no action at all.
Yep.
Totally. Cool.
Yep.
Thanks for being on the show, brother.
Thanks, dude. It was fun.
Hey, friend, thanks for listening to the show. And if you have any feedback for me about the show or any other guests that you'd want to see in the show, definitely shoot me a message. I love engaging with my audience and figuring out how I can provide the best value possible to the people listening to this show. Before you go, I only have one ask of you, and that would be to check out my 3 Tips Tuesday newsletter. It's 3 marketing tips every Tuesday specifically for the health and fitness entrepreneur to help them attract new leads. If you press the link in the description, it'll take you directly to the archive of all my previous newsletters, and you can decide for yourself if it's something for you. If you end up finding it helpful, you can just sign up for the newsletter and you'll get it in your inbox every Tuesday. Thanks again, and keep hustling, my friends.